Hello, I'm Essay, your AI essayist. Please note that all content, audio and video in this presentation are AI generated. As AI can sometimes produce inaccuracies, I encourage you to verify any factual information presented. With that in mind, let's begin.
The 1948 publications from Bell Telephone Laboratories, authored by John Bardeen, Walter Brattain, and William Shockley, represent a watershed moment in the history of science and technology. These documents, centered on the physical principles that enabled the creation of the first solid-state amplifier, established the conceptual foundations for the electronic age. The work is far more than a mere announcement of an invention. It is a profound piece of physical reasoning, a detective story written in the language of quantum mechanics and solid-state physics. This essay will undertake a sustained, section-by-section evaluation of the internal claims, arguments, and physical models presented within this foundational body of work. Our analysis will proceed by dissecting the logic and evidence articulated by its authors, assessing the coherence of their nascent theories, and tracing the intellectual pathway they forged through the complex terrain of semiconductor physics, from initial theoretical frustrations to a triumphant, if imperfect, synthesis of experiment and theory. The focus remains squarely on the content of the 1948 publications themselves, evaluating the edifice of their claims as it was originally constructed. Section 1. The initial theoretical impasse and the surface state hypothesis. The intellectual journey detailed in the 1948 papers begins with a compelling account of a failed experiment, one whose outcome was fundamental to the subsequent breakthrough. The initial goal, championed by William Shockley, was the creation of a field effect amplifier. The underlying premise was elegantly simple: an external electric field, applied perpendicularly to a thin slab of semiconductor material, should modulate the density of charge carriers within the slab and thereby control its conductivity. The team constructed apparatuses to test this principle, applying a voltage to a metal plate situated close to a germanium sample. The experimental results, however, were profoundly disappointing. The observed change in conductivity was less than 1/10 of the value predicted by straightforward electrostatic theory. This discrepancy formed the central puzzle that Bardeen, in particular, set out to solve. The author's claim in this section is twofold. First, they assert the empirical fact of the failed field effect experiment. Second, and more importantly, they posit a physical mechanism to explain it. Bardeen's proposed explanation, which became the cornerstone of their subsequent work, was the existence of electronic states localized at the very surface of the semiconductor. According to their model, these surface states acted as traps for the charge induced by the external electric field. When a positive voltage was applied to the external plate, the induced negative charges, the electrons, would overwhelmingly populate these immobile surface states instead of contributing to the mobile charge carrier population in the bulk of the material. This layer of trapped charge effectively terminated the electric field at the surface, shielding the interior of the semiconductor from its influence. The evaluation of this claim reveals its brilliance and its critical role in redirecting the research. The evidence presented for surface states in the 1948 work is indirect yet persuasive. It rests on the magnitude of the discrepancy itself. The theory provides a plausible, quantitative reason for why the simple model failed so spectacularly. The authors argue with compelling logic that some mechanism must be screening the bulk material, and the surface state hypothesis fits the experimental data with remarkable neatness. This section of their work demonstrates a crucial aspect of scientific progress: the interpretation of a negative result as a positive clue, transforming a frustrating failure into the essential first premise of a new and fruitful line of inquiry. Section 2. The emitter-collector geometry and the point-contact discovery. The recognition of surface state dominance led to a fundamental pivot in experimental design. The team reasoned that to influence the semiconductor's conductivity, they needed to work around the shielding effect of the surface states. This led to the famous experiment of December 1947 and the geometry described in their publications. This section of the work claims that amplification, can be achieved using a configuration of two closely spaced point contacts on the surface of a block of N-type germanium, in addition to a Laguerre base contact, one-point contact, biased in the forward direction with a small positive voltage relative to the base, was designated the emitter. The other, biased in the reverse direction with a much larger negative voltage, was the collector. The crucial claim is that a small signal current flowing into the emitter could modulate a much larger current flowing out of the collector. The authors present this not as a serendipitous accident, but as the outcome of a deliberate strategy rooted in their evolving understanding of surface physics. The key insight they articulate is the use of an electrolytic etch on the germanium surface, which they found was essential for observing the effect. They hypothesized that this chemical treatment altered the surface in a way that facilitated the interaction they sought. Evaluating their argument reveals the interplay of systematic investigation and prepared intuition. The evidence for their claim is the presentation of the amplification data itself, characteristic curves showing collector current as a function of collector voltage for various fixed values of emitter current. These graphs unequivocally demonstrate power gain, the central attribute of an amplifier. Their explanation of the geometry's function, at this stage, is phenomenological. They describe what is done and what is observed. The genius of this section lies in its precise description of a working, albeit delicate, configuration. The claim that two closely spaced contacts could produce amplification was revolutionary. The implicit argument is that the proximity of the contacts is paramount, suggesting a localized interaction occurring at the surface, a direct consequence of their previous work on surface states. The description of the apparatus, a slab of germanium with two gold foil contacts held in place by a plastic wedge, gives a sense of the pioneering, Sitofappant nature of the work. Yet the claims about its performance are presented with a full rigor of quantitative physical measurement. Section 3. The mechanism of hole injection and transport. Having established the empirical reality of point contact amplification, the authors then advance their core theoretical explanation for the phenomenon. This section of their work posits the revolutionary concept of minority carrier injection, specifically the injection of holes into an N-type semiconductor. In the context of 1940s physics, the hole, a conceptual vacancy in the valence band of a semiconductor that behaves as a mobile positive charge, was a relatively new theoretical construct. The paper's central theoretical claim is that the positively biased emitter contact does more than simply draw electrons from the germanium. It actively injects a current of these positive holes into the N-type material, where electrons are the majority carriers. This was a radical idea. The authors argue that these injected holes, as minority carriers, can then travel through the N-type bulk for a short distance before recombining with electrons. The evidence for this claim is inferential. The existence of amplification itself, they argue, demands a mechanism by which the small emitter current can exert a disproportionately large influence on the large collector current. The hole injection model provides such a mechanism. The flow of positive charges from the emitter toward the collector region is the physical link, the signal carrier, that was missing from previous models. In evaluating this claim, one sees the power of a unifying theory. The hole injection hypothesis elegantly explains the polarity requirements of the device. A positive emitter is needed to inject positive holes. It also provides a preliminary explanation for the importance of the close spacing between the contacts. The authors reason that the holes must reach the collector before they have a chance to recombine, implying a finite lifetime and diffusion length for these minority carriers. The argument is a beautiful piece of abductive reasoning. Amplification is observed, and the hole injection model is the best, most physically plausible explanation for the complete set of observations. This section marks the transition of the transistor from a curious laboratory effect to a phenomenon explainable by the fundamental principles of quantum solid-state physics. Section 4. The role of the collector and the amplification phenomenon. The analysis then progresses to the most crucial part of the process, the mechanism of amplification at the collector. The authors claim that the arrival of injected holes in the vicinity of the negatively biased collector contact is the direct cause of the current gain. Their 1948 model for this interaction is intricate and heavily reliant on the surface physics they had previously established. They argue that the collector, a point contact with a strong reverse bias, is already surrounded by a high electric field region. The key claim is that the injected positive holes from the emitter, upon diffusing to this region, effectively modulate the potential barrier at the collector contact. The presence of this additional positive charge, though posit, lowers the potential barrier for the flow of electrons from the semiconductor bulk into the collector. Consequently, for every one hole that arrives from the emitter, a multitude of electrons are released to flow into the collector circuit, resulting in a current gain, designated as alpha, which they report could be greater than 1. The evaluation of this claim is complex. The evidence presented is, again, the measured characteristic curves showing a collector current change that is larger than the emitter current change. The logical coherence of their explanation, however, reveals the nascent state of the theory. The model is qualitative and relies on a somewhat convoluted picture of interacting fields and surface potentials. The authors themselves acknowledge the preliminary nature of this explanation. It successfully accounts for the core observation of amplification, but it lacks the quantitative precision of a fully developed theory. The claim's strength is its conceptual completeness. It provides a plausible, intoned story from emitter injection to collector amplification. The contemporary reader can see the intellectual scaffolding being erected, a framework that, while later refined and largely replaced by the more elegant physics of the p-n junction, was absolutely essential for making sense of the initial point contact device. It was working theory that, for the first time, described how a solid-state element that achieves it. Section 5. The inversion layer hypothesis, integral to the author's 1948 explanation of hole transport, is the subtle but critical claim of a surface inversion layer. Bardeen, in particular, argued that the high density of trapped electrons in the surface states on the n-type germanium would do more than just shield the bulk. Their strong negative charge would repel the majority carriers' electrons from the region just beneath the surface and, through electrostatic attraction, would draw minority carriers' holes to it. This would create a very thin layer at the surface with type characteristics, a conductive channel for holes on an otherwise n-type crystal. This claim asserts that the injected holes from the emitter do not travel primarily through the n-type bulk but are channeled along this type inversion layer to the collector. This hypothesis served a powerful explanatory purpose. It provided a defined, high mobility pathway for the holes, elegantly explaining why the close spacing of the contacts on the surface was so effective. The inversion layer acted as a waveguide for the signal-carrying holes. Assessing this claim reveals its theoretical utility in reconciling different pieces of the puzzle. The evidence for the inversion layer was, at the time, entirely theoretical and circumstantial. Its existence was inferred because it made the rest of the model work so well. It explained the extreme sensitivity of the transistor effect to surface preparation, as the integrity of this layer would be paramount. It also helped explain the observed amplification, as the collector's field could more effectively interact with holes concentrated in this surface channel, while the inversion layer concept would become a cornerstone of future technologies like the metal oxide semiconductor field effect transistor, or MOSFET. Its role in the point contact device was a brilliant theoretical inference. The claim demonstrates the author's deep physical intuition, using one unproven but plausible concept, surface states, to logically deduce the existence of another, the inversion layer, to create a coherent, functioning model. It was a fragile but intellectually complete picture of the physics at play. Section 6. Frequency response, material properties, and operational limitations. Beyond the central claims of operation, The 1948 papers also present an analysis of the device's performance limitations and material dependencies. This section of their work makes claims about the factors governing the transistor's practical utility. A key assertion is that the frequency response of the amplifier is limited by the transit time of the holes travelling from the emitter to the collector. They present a clear physical model for a signal to be amplified faithfully. The charge carriers representing that signal must traverse the device in a time significantly shorter than the period of the signal's frequency. They estimate this transit time based on the diffusion velocity of holes and the distance between the contacts, correctly identifying the inverse relationship between contact spacing and maximum operating frequency. This claim is significant because it immediately established a clear pathway for improving the device, making it smaller. The evaluation of this argument shows a direct link between their fundamental physical theory and practical engineering guidance. The whole transit time model was a powerful and largely correct prediction. Furthermore, the authors claim that the electrical characteristics of the transistor are exquisitely sensitive to the properties of the semiconductor crystal and its surface. They detail the necessity of using high-purity single-crystal germanium and emphasize again the critical role of the specific chemical etch used for surface treatment. This claim connects the macroscopic behavior of the device directly to the microscopic purity and crystallographic perfection of the material. The evidence is the reproducibility, or lack thereof, of the effect with improperly prepared materials. A certain intellectual irony resides here. They had invented a device whose operation depended on the delicate and somewhat uncontrolled physics of a treated surface, a situation engineers typically abhor, yet they turned this into a strength by framing it as a set of controllable parameters, presenting the materials science of semiconductors as an integral part of the new electronics. Their analysis of these limitations was prescient, outlining the engineering challenges of manufacturability, stability, and high-frequency performance that would dominate the field for the next Section 7 Shockley's theoretical synthesis and the junction transistor concept. While Bardeen and Brattain's paper focused on the empirical reality and survey-centric model of the point-contact transistor, the body of work from Bell Labs in this period includes Shockley's immediate and profound theoretical response. Frustrated by the ungetatable physics of the surface and the temperamental nature of the point-contact device, Shockley formulated a new, more robust, and theoretically elegant transistor design. His publication claims that amplification could be achieved in a structure devoid of delicate point contacts, relying instead on phenomena within the bulk of the crystal. He proposed a sandwich structure, either a thin layer of N-type material between two type regions forming a PNP transistor, or the inverse NPN configuration. This is the junction transistor. Shockley's central claim was that a forward-biased PN junction could inject minority carriers holes in the PNP case into a central base region, and these carriers could then diffuse across the thin base to be collected by a second, reverse-biased PN junction. The resulting amplification mechanism was conceptually cleaner and far more predictable than the complex surface-state model of the point-contact device. The evaluation of Shockley's claim reveals it as a triumph of pure theory. At the time of his initial publication, a working junction transistor had yet to be fabricated. His argument was built entirely on a sophisticated application of the physics of the PN junction, a topic he had deeply researched. His model sidestepped the messy complexities of surface states and inversion layers, focusing on the more tractable and controllable physics of carrier diffusion and recombination within the crystalline bulk. This theoretical contribution, made in the immediate aftermath of the initial discovery, served as an internal critique and refinement of the first transistor's perceived weaknesses. It claimed that the essential principle of minority carrier injection, identified by Bardeen and Brattain, could be implemented in a superior physical architecture. This proposal set the agenda for semiconductor development for the following decade, demonstrating that the true power of the initial discovery was the set of physical principles it had uncovered, principles that could be abstracted and reapplied in more powerful and reliable forms. Conclusion: The 1948 publications detailing the invention of the transistor offer a masterclass in scientific reasoning and exposition. The evaluation of their internal claims, section by section, reveals a remarkable intellectual structure. The authors begin with the honest acknowledgement of a theoretical failure, then brilliantly reframe that failure as evidence for the novel hypothesis of surface states. From this foundation, they logically motivate the experimental design of the point-contact geometry. Their explanation for its success rests on the revolutionary and powerfully predictive claim of minority carrier injection, a concept that unified a host of empirical observations. To complete the picture, they developed a complex, surface-centric model of amplification involving whole transport within a posited inversion layer and the modulation of the collector barrier. They candidly presented the device's operational limits, linking them directly back to their physical model through the concept of carrier transit time. Finally, the intellectual ferment of the moment produced Shockley's immediate theoretical synthesis, which claimed that the core principles could be instantiated in a more robust and elegant junction-based architecture. The claims made in 1948 were not all correct in their finer details, and the initial model of the point-contact device was soon superseded. Yet, the work's enduring significance is secure. Within its pages, Bardeen, Brattain, and Shockley identified the foundational physics, established the crucial vocabulary, and articulated the essential claims of solid-state amplification, minority carrier injection, and the primacy of material purity that sculpted the modern whirl. The papers represent a complete, self-contained intellectual achievement, a monument to the process by which disciplined inquiry transforms a puzzling phenomenon into a predictable and world-altering technology.
We really appreciate you tuning in to this AI-powered presentation. Our goal is to push the boundaries of AI in content creation, and your input is invaluable. If there's a particular subject you'd like to see us tackle next, or if you have suggestions on how we could fine-tune our AI's creative prompts, please don't hesitate to leave your ideas in the comments section. We're excited to bring you more unique content very soon.